right, well, let's get started here. This is our Hispanic town hall. We're very excited to be reaching out to the Latino community here in Arizona. But before we get started, I want you to tell us the message for those who right now are in harm's way in Florida going through this catastrophic storm.
Well, first of all, we're thinking about you. We care about you, and we're rooting for you. And I know the storm is going to be very tough by all accounts. Hopefully it's not as bad as some of the predictions are. But I know obviously we're in a house of prayer, a house of God right now. If you are the praying type, and I imagine all of us are, but certainly those of us watching at home, say a prayer for the folks in Tampa, say a prayer for the folks in Central Florida, because we don't know exactly how bad this is going to be. But I was briefed by someone earlier today who explained that depending on where exactly it hits, it could be pretty bad or it could be really catastrophic for the Tampa area. So please ask God to make this storm as mild as it possibly can be, to pray for courage and for wisdom for the folks who are affected by it. And we're certainly thinking about them, and we're going to support them.
So to get started here, there's these poll numbers out, right? I know a lot of us don't really love poll numbers. But anyways, let's just dig right in. The Democrats have always thought they owned the Latino community. They always thought that, they're going to go our way. But there's a change happening. Even here with Vice President Harris. Okay, I'm getting no reaction here, people. Come on.
She was checking how awake everybody was.
Okay, there you go. She's actually slipping here in Arizona. Trump Van Siget doing better with Hispanic men. But there is an opportunity to do better with Hispanic women.
Sure.
What is your message to the Hispanic women out there as to why we desperately need a Trump-Vance presidency?
Well, there's so many issues we could talk about. And first of all, thank you for doing this. And thanks to all of you for being here and those watching at home. I mean, look, I actually spoke to a Latina woman today. We had a rally in Tucson. That's one of the reasons why I'm not in a suit, is because I told my team, if we're doing a rally outside in direct sunlight at noon in Tucson, Arizona, I'm not wearing a suit and tie. We're going to go a little casual today. But, she told me something that's actually quite heartbreaking, because she's a legal immigrant to this country. She came about 25 years ago. And she talked about waiting in line. She talked about paying the fine. She talked about, doing all the things that you have to do when you do immigration to this country the right way. And I think she felt personally offended that so many people are coming in here violating the rules that she had to follow. That's not the way to do immigration to this country. It's a way, frankly, to insult the country. And thank God that we have so many great people who did things the right way. And I think that's true, especially of a lot of our Latino families, whether it was them or their parents or their grandparents. They recognize that we've got to do this the right way. And I think that one of our messages to Latino women in particular, because of course, we know that men and women both buy groceries, but oftentimes it's the moms who are buying the groceries.
Oh no, we're in charge. Aren't we in charge?
Over the dads?
Yes. Mrs. Vance, aren't we in charge? Yes.
And look, when grocery prices go up by 25%, it's hitting our families, it's hitting our women especially hard. When the price of energy goes up by 45%, it's very often the moms that are paying the energy bills and know that it's gotten harder and harder to live your dreams under Kamala Harris's policies. And then the thing that I really care about, I'll tell you a story, Mercedes, because we were in Valdosta, Georgia, which is actually one of the cities in Georgia that was hit hard by Hurricane Helene about a week and a half ago. And, the sheriffs there, it's a small town, 60,000 people. They take me into the interdiction room where they get all the stuff that is coming through their community. And there's tons of illegal drugs, tons of illegal guns, actually, that they've seized. And there was something that was out of place because, there's marijuana, there's meth, there's fentanyl, there's everything. And then there's a box of candy that they show me. And I say, well, what's going on there? Like, why is this box of candy here? And they explain to me that the drug cartels disguise drugs as candy because it makes it easier to get it through law enforcement. And I think that a lot of moms out there, especially Latino women in places like Arizona, which of course has been affected by this more than most other states, are saying, we don't want our kids playing on playgrounds where a bag of candy is actually disguised fentanyl or THC. And I guess my pitch to women, especially Latino women, is I know that you just want common sense. I know that you want schools that educate your kids instead of indoctrinate your kids. And I know you want to raise your kids in safe communities. Donald Trump and I will fight for you every single day, and we'd love to have your vote, and we're not going to win this state without it.
Senator Vance, it is so good to see you, and more importantly, it's great to know that the hand of God is shielding and protecting President Trump and you. I know after 2 assassination attempts that we know of, hitting the campaign trail can be a little bit tough. So, familia, how many of you are happy that the hand of God is protecting President Trump and Senator Vance? Senator, poll after poll, I know we talked about polls, we got to talk about it, show that the Hispanic community cares about jobs and the economy above almost every other issue. You were actually writing about this and talking about this before it was mainstream in our community.
Sure.
In your book, you talk about the hallowing of manufacturing jobs in Appalachia. The labor of Bureau statistics show that just last month, Arizona, this state, lost 800 manufacturing jobs.
Wow.
We know that President Trump is running on putting tariffs on our adversaries like China, but can you talk about how that policy is personal to you specifically?
Yeah, so I grew up in a community where when the jobs went overseas, there was a lot of hopelessness and a lot of problems set in. And I think that we know that very often family breakdown, I'm sure that we all care a lot about having stable families out there, that family breakdown is sometimes something that happens when economic despair and hopelessness moves in. And, I'm sure we all believe we want kids to be raised by moms and dads who are happy and healthy and able to bring children into the world, but also raise children from a place of stability. That becomes really hard when the jobs that anchor these communities get shipped overseas because, somebody wants to pay a literal slave laborer sometimes in China less than they want to pay an American worker. And so they ship American jobs to China, American workers suffer. And the only way to really push back against that is to tell people that if you want to undercut American wages and you want to ship American jobs overseas, well, we're not going to let you bring that stuff back into our country unless we slap a big fat tariff on it. And that's the way that we protect American workers from... That's the way we protect American workers from what I think is a very, very predatory practice. But, what I know, because, look, we of course have Latinos at every level of our community. There are people who've been here for multiple generations. There are people who became American citizens probably a couple of weeks ago. You've got people, who are making a lot of money. You've got people who are middle class. You've got people who are really struggling. When you hollow out the manufacturing economy, whether it's in Arizona or Ohio, you really rip out the foundation of the entire economic livelihood of a community. Because, what are the lawyers going to litigate about if there aren't good manufacturing jobs to support it? What are the accountants going to do if you don't have that economic foundation laid? We know that if we want strong communities and strong families, people need good jobs. The best welfare program is a job. The best welfare program is a dignified work that pays a good wage. And it's just so hard to actually deliver that if your leadership is more interested in taxing people and forcing them to buy products made in China. Donald Trump and I want to buy great American products and employ American workers to do it.
So at CPAC, we have the CPAC Center for Combating Human Trafficking. It's a very important issue for our family, for our team at CPAC. There's 325,000 children, at least,
so sad,
that are missing, that the Kamala Harris administration have failed to find out where they are. These are children being forced into sex and labor trafficking. What's your message? How do we resolve this issue? And what's your message to Kamala Harris and her failure of leadership on this issue?
Our message to Kamala Harris is, why don't you stop talking about doing your job and actually go and do your job, find those children, and get them back safely. Mercedes, this is such an important question and such an important issue. I don't think people realize that number, 325,000 children, that your Department of Homeland Security under Kamala Harris's leadership, they're just missing. And we hope that some of them are with their families or are safe, but we know that at least a lot of them, they've been used as drug mules, they've been used in sex trafficking. And one of the things, that there's this lie at the heart of the Democrats' immigration policy. They say that it's compassionate. Well, where is the compassion for the 325,000 children that are some of them being used as sex slaves? Let's have compassion for those innocent children, bring them back to their families, and stop empowering the very people who are trafficking them, who are selling them into slavery, who are mistreating them. We've empowered, thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, the worst criminals in the entire world on both the southern side of the Mexico border and of course, our side of the Mexican border. We could do so much better by these children. We got to bring them home. We got to end this ridiculous practice that finds them sold into slavery. We can do it. We just need firm leadership at the southern border.
Senator, we talk a lot about what Kamala Harris hasn't done, but I think we should talk about what she has done. As 4 years as vice president, she actually has given us the largest inflation we've seen in over 4 decades. Here in Arizona, 12.5% of the population actually lives in poverty. Kamala Harris came out with her economic plan and proposing socialist-style price controls, things that we've seen in Venezuela. What is a Trump bench ticket going to do to bring down gas and grocery prices?
Yeah. Well, you asked about Latino voters earlier, and I actually think this is a good argument, a good reason why a lot of Latino voters are coming over to Donald Trump's leadership is because, socialism to a lot of young Americans, it's a bad word, but it's too abstract. They don't fully appreciate it. Whereas if you've got family from Cuba or from Venezuela, socialism is something that your family saw and you know it doesn't work. And fundamentally what Kamala Harris is trying to do is take policies that have been tried by Marxist governments in South America and Central America and bring them to the United States of America. And I think a lot of Latinos are saying, our family came here to get away from this stuff, not to lean into it. And that's exactly what Donald Trump is going to do, prevent that from coming here. Now, it's funny, guys, because, Kamala's campaign, it's interesting. I made this point when I debated Tim Walz last week. That he's got to do
that
this.
was the best debate ever.
That was so good.
Okay, I don't mean to interrupt you, sir. But our daughters, because Matt and I, not Abraham and I, Matt and I have 5 daughters, and they were all going, he's so slay. That was like the big word. And then my mother, abuela, Lela, they call her, she goes, and he's so handsome. And I was like, yeah. So there you go. You got them all covered.
That's great. Usha, you got some competition for Mercedes Abuela here. But look, what I said to him, I genuinely meant this, right? I wasn't just kind of making fun of him. He has a really tough job because he has to defend the indefensible, which is Kamala Harris's record. And if you notice, when she goes around the country, she does this thing that, I haven't been in politics long enough. Maybe I haven't, if I was in politics a little bit longer, I'd be a little bit more shameless. But, she says on day one, we're going to tackle the affordability crisis. Or on day one, we're going to tackle the national security problems. On day one, we're going to make the border more secure. It's like, Kamala, day one was 1,400 days ago. What have you been doing the whole time? Stop talking about it. Go do something. But I don't know if you noticed, and I think it was yesterday, maybe the day before yesterday, but she went on The View, and she made a big mistake. If you guys, I wouldn't recommend watching The View at all, but especially not with Kamala Harris out there. But they asked her, the ultimate softball question, which is, did Joe Biden do anything that you disagreed with? And remember, her whole campaign is to run away from Joe Biden, even though she's his vice president. And she said, well, nothing comes to mind. One difference that you can name between her and Joe Biden, and by her own words, knowing this would be a softball, she said nothing comes to mind. Now, in Kamala Harris's defense, and I'm not trying to be mean, I think, whatever the topic might be, maybe nothing comes to mind for Kamala Harris. So that's just kind of how she
That's
how
Joe
she does
Biden.
things.
I think the Joe Biden, it doesn't come to mind. I mean, that might be it.
But it just drives home how everything that has been tried and found wanting over the last 3.5 years, she's offering to double down on it. And if you want to take the country in a different direction, if you think, for example, the way to lower energy prices is not socialist price controls, but to unleash American energy workers to develop this stuff in our own territory, as Donald Trump would say, drill, baby, drill. That's the solution to high energy prices. And unlike Kamala Harris, we don't just have a plan, we also have a record to run on. But I genuinely, I don't know Tim Walz that well, but I feel really bad for him because I can go out there and say, oh, my running mate delivered record low inflation. He delivered rising take-home pay. He delivered a secure southern border. Tim Walz's running mate delivered exactly the opposite, and she's going to get even worse if we make her the president of the United States, and we're not going to do that because we're going to fight and make sure Donald Trump wins this election.
Switching a little bit to an important topic for this crowd, Senator. I'm the son of Mexican grandparents who immigrated and they found Christ here in this nation. For Hispanics, you don't separate the United States from God.
Sure.
And the left has waged war on those values. We see coaches getting put into jail for praying on the field. We see anti-Semitism running rampant on college campuses.
Yep.
We know at BMB.CPAC that when the church votes, we win every single time.
That's right.
You have a very special story of how you came to God. Can you share a little bit about that? And
Sure.
how are we going to bring God back into healing this nation?
Yeah, well, we have, look, tens of millions of Christians who go to church every single Sunday won't show up to vote in 2024. And to my fellow Christians, I'd say, if you don't show up and vote, that's how we lose this country. This is not just disagreements about tax policy. I mean, these guys are explicitly going after fundamental religious liberties, the right for you to raise your kids in the church that you want to, the right for nuns to practice their faith as they want to and minister as they want to. That's all on the table. And, you know, you're right. I do have an interesting faith journey, though I think it's probably pretty similar to a lot of folks' faith journey, which is I was raised by a grandmother, and my grandmother raised me because my own mom struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. And Mamaw was a woman of many contrasts. I mean, I think it's important to be honest that she was a very devout Christian. She was a very thoughtful Christian. I mean, she read the Bible every day. She thought about what it required of her, even though she hadn't graduated from high school herself. She also really loved the F word. I mean, she was a foul-mouthed woman, even though she was a very devout Christian. And Usha will tell you that sometimes I talk like Mamaw does, and the 4-year-old repeats it, and that's a problem. But, you know, I think like a lot of young people, you know, I went to high school, and then I went to the Marine Corps, and then I went to college after the Marine Corps. You know, I started to think that I knew more than my grandmother did. And I started to feel like this sort of young man's arrogance about the problems that were out there, the questions that I had my own answers to. And by the time I was probably 24, 23, I sort of just said, I don't believe in this stuff anymore. And I kind of discarded my faith. And, you know, what brought me back to Christ was actually falling in love with Usha because, you know, the more that I sort of thought, okay, I'm madly in love with this woman. I want to marry her. I want to be a father. I want to sort of do all those things. When you start thinking about the really deep questions, not about like what education do you have or what kind of job do you have, but how do I be a good husband? How do I be a good father? Like what is required of me in those important vocations? What I kept coming back to is Mamaw's Christian faith had a lot more wisdom than whatever it was that I had adopted since abandoning my Christian faith. And the big questions, how to be a virtuous person, how to be a good husband and father, I thought the Christian faith had the best answers to those questions, and that got me back on the pathway. I was actually baptized for the first time in 2019 because I'd never been baptized as a kid, and here I am.
That is an incredible story. You were talking about Tim Walz and that debate. He mentioned he was a knucklehead at one point, but we won't get into that. But during his time and his time now as Minnesota governor, talking about parental rights, something that is incredibly important for the Latino community as well, where they did pass a law that would allow, you know, they could take the child away from the parents if the parents don't agree
really
in this
stuff.
transitioning of gender. Walk us through why we should be very concerned about a Harris-Walz administration and what that would mean.
Well, I think, and luckily most of our citizens, even you know, people who might disagree with us politically are not there yet, but Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have really bought into the furthest left-wing social doctrine of the modern Democratic Party. And so take, for example, a kid, and I think we all know being a teenager is confusing, especially in the era of social media. I think a lot of us say that these kids who are gender confused, they need support, they need love, they don't need chemical interventions that are irreversible when they're 13 years old. Now, I would call what I just said common sense, and frankly, I think 80%, 90% of our fellow citizens would agree with it. But if you disagree, and you think the solution is a permanent chemical intervention in that child's body, then you have to ask yourself, who makes those decisions, the parents or the government? And unfortunately, Tim Walz's leadership in Minnesota, and Kamala Harris, this has happened in California too, they've endorsed the idea of taking children away from their parents if the parents don't consent to gender transition. And I think, you know, you start talking about somebody's going to take my kid away because I don't want them experimenting on their bodies in a chemical way. That is preposterous and a violation of the most important right I think that we have anywhere in our society. That's the right of parents to parent their children how they see fit. It's disgraceful, and it's scary. It really is. And I think we have to ask ourselves, because as Christians, of course, sometimes our values aren't always popular, especially with modern secular culture. We have to ask ourselves, do we want the right to parent our children as we see fit, or do we want the state to have the right to take them away from us if we dare to teach our children what we believe? And I think, unfortunately, even though Kamala Harris wouldn't say it like that, that's on the ballot. So if you want to parent your children as you see fit, Donald Trump is the only candidate on the ballot who's going to fight for that right and fight for it for a very long time.
Senator, when President Trump left office, the typical average income needed to afford a home was about $50,000. Today, that has risen up to $100,000.
Sure.
The average age of the Hispanic community here in America is 29 years old, meaning we're the youngest racial demographic in the country. It's hard for anybody to buy a home in this economy, but specifically young Hispanics.
Yeah.
How can we look forward to a Trump-Vance administration to helping millions of young Hispanics achieve that American dream?
So this is such an important point, and look, whatever the color of your skin, whatever your background, I think that is a fundamental part of the American dream, that we want our young people to be able to own and buy a stake in their own country. That is an important part. Think about this. We're turning a generation of young people, again, all demographics, but you're right, it's a bigger deal because I think Latinos are a little younger than the average American. We're turning a generation of Americans into paupers in their own country, where they have to rent everything. They're constantly in debt. I want young Latino families to be able to own a share in this country they call their own, and we've got to have better policies to make that happen. Now, here are the two big things that I would point to that have made homes unaffordable in this country. Okay, number one, of course, mortgage interest rates. That's a big reason why the average monthly mortgage is so high. It's because interest rates are through the roof. Well, why are interest rates through the roof? Because Kamala Harris cast the deciding vote on trillions of dollars of new spending. That sent inflation through the roof, and then interest rates followed after that. The second thing that I'd say is we got to build more houses, okay? And we got to make sure they go to American citizens, not to illegal aliens. American citizens, again, whether you've been here one generation or three. And think about this. Okay, we're talking about energy, and I know we're getting the rap sign, so I'll try to talk really fast. I'll talk like an auctioneer. But, you take a home. It's got to be built, of course, with all of the building materials. I know we have a lot of Latinos, especially in Arizona, who are working in the construction industry in some form or another. Well, what if the truck driver who's delivering the materials to the build site is paying 50% more for diesel? That makes the cost of housing go up. What if the energy required to build that house goes up by 50%? That's going to make the cost of housing go up. When we go to war on American energy, we make everything more expensive, especially housing. So lower those interest rates, unleash American energy, and we will make the American dream of homeownership affordable again under the leadership of Donald J. Trump.
So in our audience member, Gloria Badia Vizcara, she is owner of Chiltepica Products, which is salsa. So if you like chips and salsa, you're in. Gloria, you have a question for the senator.
Yes, thank you, Senator, for being here with us today. And my question is, when you and President Trump get into office, what is the plan that you guys have for small business like ours? And because we've been really suffering for the past 3.5 years. Our business is a spice company and we make salsa. And starting from our raw materials to packaging, we've been seeing an increase between 40 and 50%.
Wow.
So it is a lot. So we need a plan, fast.
Well, Gloria, I really appreciate your question. I appreciate you doing what you do and having the courage to be here. I'd say the first and most important part of our plan is to elect Donald Trump President of the United States because we can't do anything unless we win this election. And once we get in there, so, two big things that I think that we can do to make it easier on our small businesses. So first of all, we have got this incredible, and it's onerous, and it's really hard for a lot of small businesses to navigate, a lot of regulations that just shouldn't be there, okay? We all believe in health and safety. We all believe in clean air and clean water. But why are we forcing small businesses like yours to obey pages and pages of regulations that even the regulators sometimes don't even understand what they mean? Now, if you're a big bank and you've got an army of lawyers to navigate that stuff, it's a little bit easier. I imagine it's probably a little bit harder for you when some new regulation comes down that makes it harder for you to run your business. And I think for a business like yours, I don't know a ton about it, but I can tell obviously you're in the salsa business, we got to get the cost of materials lower. And I think that I'm sure you guys are probably paying a lot for shipping right now, right? Because energy is so expensive. So what we've got to do is lower the cost of gasoline, lower the cost of diesel, and then make it easier for you to buy these supplies that you need at a lower price. And when we talk about you're buying a lot of stuff, but it's all downstream from our agriculture industry, right? A lot of the stuff that you're buying, whether it's coming from overseas or coming from the United States, it's downstream from agriculture. Well, if farmers are going out of business and farmers are getting bankrupted and Kamala Harris is threatening and in some cases imposing new taxes on our farmers, that's going to raise the cost of everything that you're buying. So lower the costs, make it more predictable, make the regulatory environment a little bit easier for you to navigate. And I think those are the three things that we really want to do to help your small business.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Senator, our next question comes from Officer Jose Pimienta, who is the president of the Nogales Police Officers Association.
Good afternoon, sir, and thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you.
Here in Arizona, specifically here in Maricopa County, violent crime rate in the first part of the year was higher than the national average. Democrats have refused to back the blue and instead have caved to those who are calling to defund the police. Crime is not only a law enforcement issue, but a family issue as well. What can we expect from you and President Trump when it comes to helping the police do their jobs?
Well, thank you so much for the question, and thanks for your service. And, one of the cool things that you learn when you run for vice president is before most events, including this one, you take some photos with people. And, usually, because you've got this big motorcade, some law enforcement officials will want to take a photo with you. One of the coolest things that I've noticed about our law enforcement community is how many Gonzalez and Hernandez and how many Latinos are serving as law enforcement officers every single day, keeping us safe. And I just, if you think about that, what that means is that people, again, whether it was their grandparents or maybe even themselves, they've come to this country, they've come in the right way, and they've decided they love this country so much that they want to be part of the group that keeps us safe. All Americans together, they fight for us every single day, and I think that's a great testament to their patriotism, but also to the way that our country makes everybody an American from all walks of life. That's an incredible thing. And I think that what we have to do is, this is very simple, actually. You just have to support law enforcement, make it easier for them to do their job, give our cops the pay and benefits that they need, because as you know, we're losing a lot of good police officers. And, Kamala Harris has pursued a lot of policies that make it harder, or I should say easier, to sue law enforcement officers when they're out there doing their job. There's this thing called immunity, where when a police officer is doing their job or when a judge is doing his job or whoever, we make sure that people are able to do their job. And so long as they're doing it well, we don't overwhelm them with unnecessary lawsuits. We need to protect our police officers from these bogus lawsuits, often funded by left-wing interest groups, because how can they do their job to keep us safe if they're worried that every time they do it, they're going to be sued or have their livelihoods ruined for it? And that's the thing. When I talk to police officers, sir, the number one thing that I hear is they're terrified that they're going to have their lives ruined for doing their job.